Wonder Boy, one of the classic Sega franchises that originated in the mid-80s as an arcade game, and one with a very convoluted history. The original Wonder Boy game was developed by a company called Escape, later renamed to West 1-Bit Entertainment, and saw ports to many home consoles under different names, most popular of which is Adventure Island on the Nintendo Entertainment System, a port that spawned an entirely separate line of games altogether. This was the result of West 1 owning the rights to the game engine used by the original Wonder Boy, while the characters and titles were properties of Sega. For today's review, I'm jumping a bit ahead to Wonder Boy 5, Monster World 3, or as it's known in the West, Wonder Boy and Monster World, published in Japan in 1991 and in Europe and North America in 1992 for the Sega Mega Drive. Now, Monster World is a sub-series within the main Wonder Boy series, so the game I'm going to be looking at is the 5th installment in the Wonder Boy series and the 3rd title in its Monster World sub-series. Yeah, I don't blame you if you found all of that hard to follow. In true West 1 fashion though, the game received a port for the TurboGrafx-CD in 1993 for North American audiences, known as the Dynastic Hero, which also found its way to Japan a year later. Since the Mega Drive and TurboGrafx-CD versions are virtually identical in terms of gameplay and progression, I will be using footage from them interchangeably for this video. With all of the messy trivia out of the way, I think it's time to get into the actual game itself. Wonder Boy in Monster World and the Dynastic Hero, something I'll refer to as Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero, is an action side-scrolling RPG in the veins of Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, a so-called Metroidvania game. You'll be traversing various landscapes and dungeons while defeating enemies and bosses, collecting goodies and upgrading your equipment on a quest to help out townspeople and restore peace to the land. That's the main gist of the gameplay, but also for the plot really. In Wonder Boy and Monster World, you take control over Xion, who has vowed to defeat the invading legion of monsters and save Monster World and its inhabitants. And that's about it. The Dynastic Hero has the slightest bit more detail, but it's still minimal. The beautiful and peaceful woodland Terran has been attacked by an evil offense known as the Drillcore Empire. Amidst the destruction and despair, the Dynastic Hero rose above all to take on the battle for freedom and make Terran the quiet and pure country it once was. Look, neither versions have any sort of engaging storytelling, and I am mildly disappointed by that. You help out a bunch of people while you're on your adventure to find and destroy the ultimate villain, but it's all disjointed without any significant meaning. There's no character development, and excluding the very beginning and ending portions of the game, there is a complete absence of backstory at all. Don't misunderstand, I hate it when games force you to sit through long and exhausting dialogue sessions, but a little more meat to the bones here would have been welcome. Fortunately, the core aspect of a video game, the gameplay, is excellent in Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero. As I mentioned, the game is best categorized as a Metroidvania experience, where all the locales you travel through are interconnected. Little of the world is accessible as you start out, as guards are blocking the door, the desert sand is too hot to walk across, and you can't dive into the ocean without specific equipment, etc. It is your job to explore other sections of the game first in search for items that open up the way to new areas. There are a total of 5 towns and a total of 7 dungeons, all mandatory to save and pass respectively in order to reach the final castles. What puts me off about many RPGs or open world types of games in general is being clueless as to where to go next. Think of being stuck and aimlessly wandering around in Ys or other top-down JRPGs, asking folks for advice where you can find a specific person or item that you need for advancement. I'm glad to say the way of progression is rarely, if ever, cryptic in Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero. It's often self-explanatory, and when it's not, townfolks offer genuinely helpful advice. What helps a lot is that there are usually only a handful of people to talk to in a village, so the time spent figuring out where you got to head next is negligible. Sometimes you may be misguided into a long pathway by the environment, only to run into a dead end and discover you have to backtrack all the way because you can't proceed without a certain item, which is admittedly irksome, but these moments are few and far between, luckily. Whereas Symphony of the Night isn't entirely straightforward and usually grants the player a few choices for the next destination, Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero is linear when it comes to the order in which the main quest has to be done. Even though the layout of the map isn't linear, every time you play through the game, you'll be visiting the numerous towns and dungeons in the exact same manner. This can be a turnoff depending on the player, as the exploration factor isn't as prominent due to this reason, and it also decreases the replay value. While this is true, there are still a decent amount of nooks and crannies with nifty upgrades to find. There are caves with branching paths, and previously explored areas sometimes contain small passageways or locked off sections exclusively available with a later power-up. The roads on the overworld have a tendency to split into two as well, so on the whole, the game does have extra goodies to find if you hunt for them. The underwater areas are a great example, possessing many hidden treasure chests
Waiting for some brave adventurer to find.
What is the type of stuff you can find? Mostly gold, but also additional health in the form of hearts like heart containers in The Legend of Zelda, and even magic spells. The gold you collect can be used to sleep at inns for saving the game and restoring all of your health and magic, and more interestingly, purchasing new equipment and various medicines. This is where the RPG component of Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero starts playing a role. Your character himself cannot level up, rather you can increase your offenses, defenses and speed using weapons, shields, armors and boots. With each new town you come across, you can buy better and better equipment, of course at a higher and higher price. Upgrading your character to become stronger is one of the main factors that makes RPGs so addicting in my eyes, and it's present in this game. The need for tedious gold grinding by defeating enemies over and over is also fairly minimal, more so when you find huge packets of dough in secret treasure chests. My only gripe here is that you're merely given the name of a particular item when confronting the shop owner and have no idea how it's going to affect your stats until you've bought and equipped it. Even then, sometimes I saw none of my attributes changing with material that was more expensive. I'm assuming each piece of equipment has its own unique ability. In fact, I know the ladder boots, for example, allow you to climb faster, but the game itself doesn't clarify any of this. Now, for anyone who's played Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, the combat in Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero should feel familiar. Whenever you face a new sort of monster, the worst thing you can do is recklessly whack around your sword or spear in the hope you win. Chances are you will get overwhelmed and die again before you reach the next inn. Taking your distance, recognizing patterns and then attacking at the right moment is the key to survival. Reflexes are still important, however, because it's completely random when your opponent takes his chance at you. This can feel obnoxious at first, especially if you aren't a careful player. But as I played the game more and more, I realized it led to more depth and challenge, preventing things from becoming too stale. Also helping on that is the ability to use the aforementioned magic spells. You've got homing projectiles, screen nukes, and temporary means of enhancing power and shielding. In dangerous circumstances, these can act as major saviors, but effectiveness may vary between monster types and usage isn't unlimited, so they ought to be used wisely. Would have liked a greater variety of enemies in certain parts of the game though, because battling the same foe over and over in a given location becomes boring sooner or later. I also wish you had more control over your attacking direction. You could swing your sword or stab your spear forwards and not much else, a noticeable handicap in cramped situations. Your default ground speed also has no valid reason to be as awfully slow as it is. New boots serve to tackle the problem, but you don't acquire any until you're an hour or so into the game. I find these hindrances at most myself, but I would understand if the stiffness of the combat and sluggish pacing of the game are too awkward and primitive for certain players. What I perhaps enjoyed most about Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero is the way it mixes fighting monsters with platforming. Many of the level designs are well thought out in that regard, especially in the case of the dungeons. It's not so much about navigating a maze like in, again, The Legend of Zelda, but more about overcoming a set of trials that test your anticipation skills and precision. I'm somewhat bummed out about the lack of puzzle solving, seeing how it would make the dungeons longer and more intricate, but at least the platforming platforming is tight and varied between areas, from dealing with ice physics to making time jumps on quickly moving platforms. It gets more and more demanding the further you get. The way this blends together with the different stage hazards and numerous sorts of enemies is where the game shines. Anticipating jumps with incoming enemies, jumping over spikes with conveyor belts under your feet, moments like these prove that Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero is not just a good Metroidvania RPG, but also a good side-scrolling platformer at the same time. As much as I love Symphony of the Night, that game does not incorporate nearly as tricky platforming, and it's a lot easier to beat because the RPG elements have much more weight to them there. Get some decent equipment, and the difficulty falls like a stack of dominoes. This does not apply to Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero, and for that, I want to applaud it. What I perhaps enjoyed least about the game are the boss battles. Oh, Gunstar Heroes, how you've spoiled me. Okay, some of them are cool with intriguing patterns, and they're not awful overall. I particularly got a kick out of the snowman encounter. It has that nice combination of platforming and combat I've just addressed. One too many times though, it felt like I was outlasting a war of attrition. You get hit all the time, yet you come out victorious by mindlessly slashing away. The final boss is the supreme example of this. For Wonder Boy in Monster World anyway. For some reason, it was drastically simplified in the Dynastic Hero, to the point it possesses absolutely no threat whatsoever. As for the other gameplay differences between the two, besides some naming nuances and more colorful, lively dialogue in the Dynastic Hero, Wonder Boy in Monster World is marginally more difficult than the TurboGrafx-CD counterpart. Whenever you die in the Mega Drive version, you get a game over and are reset to the last time you saved your game. This can be pretty unforgiving, as any sort of progress you've made is lost when you get killed, and there are times it takes an eternity to reach another village. In the Dynastic Hero, you're also sent back to the last visited inn, but all the items you've obtained along the way are still in your possession, meaning it's just a matter of traveling back to where you perished. You can, however, use the return spell in Wonder Boy and Monster World found about 1/3 into the game, which teleports you back to last night's stay without losing anything, so there's at least that. The remaining changes are all in the presentation. Wonder Boy and Monster World is an adorable looking game full of bright colors and cute sprites, but it's unimpressive for Mega Drive standards. This game does not make great use of the 16-bit hardware. Besides some parallax scrolling here and there, the graphics have the appearance of a buffed up 8-bit game with limited animation, static backgrounds I failed to notice much, and hardly any special effects. To be honest though, I am not bothered by it. Wonder Boy in Monster World may not be a programming juggernaut, but it's visually simple and clean, sporting a charming art style and interesting set pieces that compensate for the underwhelming technical side of things. The Dynastic Hero altered many of the game's sprites, including the one for the hero himself, to go along with the new cast of insect characters. I could pick up on the accents of parallax scrolling, and a portion of the coloring is different, but otherwise the graphics are very much in line with the Mega Drive version. Musically is where it really diverges itself. Because it's CD based, the musicians from Sin Sound Design were able to utilize Red Book audio and create some really orchestral sound for the Dynastic Hero. Overall, it's a very delicate, energetic, and even atmospheric score when it needs to be. Some of the songs, the one for the anime-esque opening scene in particular, couldn't be any more cheesy though, and while this musical interpretation of the monster world works well during gameplay, I had to actively re-listen all the tracks afterward because very little of them stuck with me. Still, this is a high-quality soundtrack for a video game of its time, and it's pretty overlooked. Wonder Boy and Monster World, on the other hand, features a classic FM soundtrack with memorable compositions that are perfectly suitable for many of the environments in their own way. Some of these songs will always stick with me, special mention going to the tune for the final dungeon. There are some orchestral vibes to be had and the FM instrument patches aren't too hard on the ears, but like the visuals, the audio department isn't necessarily anything to write home about technically. None of the percussion is sampled and the secondary sound chip, responsible for the typical 8-bit square wave sound, isn't utilized at all for layering. Despite that, good music is good music, and Shinichi Sakamoto deserves more appreciation for his work than he gets. Both soundtracks have their own strengths and weaknesses, but this is my preferred one between the two. All things considered, Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero is a wonderful game. It merges together a side-scrolling action-adventure platformer with some RPG elements and a structure many would classify as Metroidvania nowadays, quite complementary. The execution is not perfect in all respects, as the game is relatively slow, has generally lousy boss encounters, and lacks a true story which would have helped immersing the player into the shoes of the main character and the world around him. However, even with said flaws, this is a very fun and often legitimately challenging title that doesn't show its age too much, and one I found hard to put down once I got into it. Wonder Boy the Dynastic Hero is not as long and massive as Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but finishing it the first time around should still take anywhere from 6 to 10 hours depending on the player. For a 16-bit game of the time, that's a very respectable length. Both Wonder Boy and Monster World and the Dynastic Hero can be found on the Wii's Virtual Console, but the former is available for download on Steam, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 too, making it a more accessible version. I recommend avoiding the Virtual Console if possible anyway, because the Steam and PS3 downloads are much cheaper, and on 360 you get Wonder Boy in Monsterland and Monster World 4 along with Wonder Boy in Monster World for around 10 euros. With that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you're going to try the game, may you enjoy it as much as I did. Have a great day everyone.